Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. This episode is sponsored by our sponsors, Connection Technologies, specialists in telecom and IT services. So I really, push you to go and check them out. Today, we're really fortunate to have Jamal Campbell-Ryce on the podcast with us. You know, Jamal played over 550 appearances across his career. I've got here playing for 14 different clubs. I hope I've counted that right. International appearances with Jamaica, and now currently England youth teams coach and Peterborough under-18s manager. So Jamal, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me, mate.
No problem. I wanted to try and think about things a little different today rather than just going through your career, but draw on actually your experiences and answer some important questions that the audience want to hear, want to learn. And just to kick us off, I touched on it there, such a long career playing so many games, across so many different clubs. What sort of habits did you pick up, whilst playing that you think allowed you to play for so long, allowed you to have such a successful and long career? Just thinking more specifically, probably around like the performance habits, the things that became habit for you.
It's a really good question to start off with. I think I've always been a bit of a fitness freak, a bit of a gym bunny when I was playing. Even on my days off, evenings when I go home, I'd always go down to David Lloyd or whatever gym was most local to me. Recovery was a huge thing. Probably in my earlier years, probably took it for granted when you're younger. Obviously, like you recover a lot quicker, your metabolism is really good, and and like I said, you recover really quick. But it was probably when I got into my late 20s, certainly when I touched 30, that I certainly started to feel that my body was reacting a little differently, especially picking up more niggly injuries. So I started to really hone in on that, and like I said, going to the gym, recovering, going to the pool, which I, like I said, in my early 20s when I first started, would never do, but certainly towards like 27, 28, and into my 30s, like going to the pool, going to the gym, and before it'd be just lifting weights and doing a bit of core, but then started incorporating stretching, making sure that I was nice and mobile, supple, and I think that had a big influence on why, which allowed me to play up until the age of 37, which I was extremely fortunate to do without any real long-term injuries, touch wood.
What I think is really great there. And so was this extra bits and pieces you're doing from the club? Was this prescribed bits that you had at the clubs, or was this like routines that you just developed and took upon yourself to go and do after training?
A bit of both, really. I think if you're not learning, you're losing. So, like each club that I played for, especially as I got older, I started to listen to the more knowledgeable people, taking things on board, things do's and don'ts, what you shouldn't be doing with your body, recovery, like what you should be putting inside your body and stuff, and recovery methods. Some of it like cryo, things like that. Stretching, going to the pool, like I alluded to, all these type of things. And I remember when I was at Notts County, there was a physio there. You might be aware of him, John Wilson. Probably the best physio that I've come across. He's done loads and loads of talks and things all over the world in terms of physiotherapy and recovery and stuff like that. And he was a big influence in terms of recovery and how to treat your body and what's best for you. And listen, I'm not saying I was perfect, but I certainly started to incorporate a lot of the things that he said. Like, not that I was a regular at it, but like I started doing Pilates, which I love doing, yoga, which are really big things. And obviously, everybody knows Ryan Giggs had a prolonged career, and that was one of the reasons him taking up yoga.
No, definitely. I think there's so many things out there that, I probably really encourage people to go and explore and also just to start to learn what works for them and as athletes and individuals. I think the recovery sessions you do after is probably as important as potentially the training sessions you do, because you're getting yourself right, you're making sure that you're getting your body in the best place to perform on the weekend. And it's that kind of that self-care, that bit of self-love that helps players, like you say, to just be able to maintain their fitness.
Mm.
One thing what I found really, or thought was really interesting, you played across loads of teams, and I think for most people, like a little like change is really daunting. We don't want to have change, we don't want to change location. Like you played for loads of different teams throughout your career in different parts of the country, maybe different teammates, different playing styles. What sort of things allowed you to obviously be able to go into so many different teams and be successful?
Do you know what? It's a really good question. For me, it was almost like I needed a change to be challenged. I hated being comfortable. If I was at a club for 2 3 years and being the main man, and like I was at clubs, and it's when I say the main man, I don't mean being. I mean like knowing that you're going to play every week, and that was almost detrimental to me. It was almost like I needed to be challenged. I needed competition. I needed a change. And it was almost like whenever I went to a new club, had to seek pastures new. It was almost like you're going in and proving yourself again. So it's almost like when you go somewhere new. For me, it was like you have to go in and justify your price tag and why the managers brought you in, why the club have brought you in, proving to fans and most certainly your teammates that you are a good player. So that was a big thing for me. I always loved that challenge. You have some players that, like you say, that they hate change. I played with a couple of players that were one or two club men across a large span of their career, and that's incredible. Saw many managers come and go, saw many players come and go, but they always remained at the same club. And obviously, I was a little bit different. I was a London boy, but the majority of my career I played up north, and I loved it. But yeah, I just think sometimes you just gotta. It's almost challenging yourself mentally.
Yeah, and what did it like? Obviously, day one, you're going into a new club, and what are the things, or the things that you thought, if I did these, if I trained well, if I did certain bits and pieces, what were the things that obviously integrated yourself into these clubs as quick as possible?
I think the first thing is as soon as you go to a club is train well and play well, because straight away you've got the buy-in from the fans, the managers, and the coaches and your teammates. And ultimately, like when you're when you're playing well, when you're training well, once you've got that buy-in from everyone, it's almost like you're joining a family. It's always difficult for players. You see so many players, like even world-class players, they go to certain clubs, and they've been brilliant in their career for the last 2 3 4 years. Okay, for an example, Eden Hazard at Chelsea, he's a legend at Chelsea. Goes to Real Madrid, thinks he's going to be one of the Galacticos and hardly kicks a ball, doesn't set the world alight, doesn't, and ends up getting released. And we're talking about a world class player here. Nobody can turn around and say that he turns into a bad player overnight, but sometimes it just doesn't work out, and you haven't got the buy-in from the fans, you haven't got the buy-in from the manager, and you haven't got the buy-in from your teammates. So just a small example like that, it is difficult when you go to different clubs, and sometimes it just doesn't work out everywhere you go. Fans and managers are fickle, and they're quick to say, "Oh, not a good player," whatever the fan. We all know fans are very very fickle, but sometimes like it doesn't always work out like that. If you've got family and they don't settle, you might not settle yourself. It's tough. But for me, I always like embraced the challenge. I thoroughly enjoyed it, something different. Although I only played obviously in this country, probably one of the biggest regrets of my career was not playing abroad, but I played up and down the country, and Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and from such a, I guess, what an experience playing different locations with different people. Was there any real big, like, inspirational characters that obviously helped shape your career, shaped what you became? I know you mentioned obviously the physio in Notts County. Is there anyone else that really stands out as being really inspirational for you?
Yeah, if you listen, I could go on for days talking about people who have really influenced my career, but probably from when I was coming through at Charlton as a scholar, there was two coaches, Mark Robson, top coach, like best coach I've worked with. He's under 21s head coach at West Ham currently. Um, he's worked in the FA as well. He's worked at Peterborough, but like if anybody knows Mark Robson, top coach, very good. And I was lucky with him because he obviously is an ex-player as well, similar stature to myself, and he just worked on my game non-stop. As soon as he come into the building and was working together, he helped my game unbelievably. And then the other one, again at Charlton, who was my reserve team manager, Glyn Snodding. As soon as I got my first professional contract, made me captain of the reserves and just gave me incredible confidence and turned me into a leader, something that I didn't know that I had in my armory. But that was brilliant and just filled me with so much confidence and belief. Those two men are probably huge reasons why I had a long career in the game. And if we're talking about players, see coming through at Charlton, I was lucky that at the time with some big characters there, big players, Paolo Di Canio, just to name one. But Scott Parker, watching him and Paolo were brilliant. But there was other players like Kevin Lisby, John Fortune, Paul Konchesky took me under their wing because they were young players that come through the system at Charlton as well, and I think they were great examples for me coming through at the football club, and it was almost like we was a family. So they were brilliant, and it was brilliant to learn off them every day to see how their careers went, and I still speak to them like pretty often these days now.
I think there's yeah, thanks, mate. There's loads of really interesting bits in there. Just touching on like the individual like work and development as a player in those early days at Charlton. Is there anything that you found across your career that, in terms of like the football individual bits that you need to get done within the week, or if things got tough, places to go and work on, or do you think you set the foundations early and every bit of work then just built on that across
No,
your career?
listen, I think I was lucky because physically, I'm like 5'6" at a push, but I was physically good. I was in the gym, I was strong, and I was very quick. I could run all day. But one thing in my game that I needed, being a wide man, that I need to brush up on was my crossing and my end product. And like I could beat two, three, four players every time, but I get to the byline or my final pass, my final cross wasn't good enough. And just remember Mark Robson just staying out with me all the time, and maybe once or twice a week, he wouldn't let me go in after the session's finished until I crossed 30 or 40 balls off both feet, different areas of the pitch. Um, and like now, I can like throughout my career, obviously that was one of the things that I was really good at. Like I could get to the byline whether or not I was playing left or right. I can put in three or four or five different variations of crosses with both feet, and that's down to him because he took the time out to work with me, and people don't see that behind the scenes. People don't see when you've had a long career that these people that take their time out. Like as a coach, obviously I'm coaching now. How tiring it can be. You've got a squad of 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 players, and working with some players individually, it can be tiring. And he done that a lot with me and really helped my career.
I think that's really important. Obviously identifying the areas of your game that you need to work on, whether that's yourself or if you've got a coach to do it. But then that deliberate practice, that practice where you're going out and you're purposefully working on it. You're not just putting a cross in, but you're simulating what you need to do in the game. You're working on, like you say, your left foot, your right foot, and it's just a repetition of that. It's how you develop skills and learn and work over time.
Mm.
You spoke about, obviously the leadership qualities that you developed, and I'm quite conscious that there's many different types of leader. Ones who lead by example, or you can have the quieter kind of leaders, or the ones who the mouths in the change rooms. Like, what did you see and view leadership as? What did it mean to you to be that leader?
So there's bang on with what you said. The different types of leaders. Scott Parker was a brilliant leader because he was probably one of the quietest players that I've ever I've ever played with. But in terms of his performances, he was the all round one of the most complete midfielders that I've seen. Flying to tackles, he scored from 25, 30 yards. He could dribble. He could slide passes through. He was just complete, and he would just lead by example by his performances. He was at the end of a game, he'd always cover the most distance, never injured, and just the ultimate professional. And then you had the leaders like I played with Chris Bart Williams. God rest his soul. He just passed away a couple of weeks ago. It was just a tough one to take, but an incredible man, on and off the pitch. Off the pitch, like the most humble, kind, giving person you'll ever come across. Had time for Definitely had time for me and time for everyone. Always smiling, could brighten up a room. Like I don't think I ever saw him come into training like in a mood, miserable. But let me tell you, on the pitch, he was one of the nastiest people that I've ever, like, and I'm talking about as a teammate. He would F and blind and C word you off like non-stop, tell you how shit you are. And that's not coming from a horrible place, but it was just because he demanded so much. He came from a place of he wanted to be a winner. He played for top club, he played for Nottingham Forest, he played for Sheffield Wednesday, top football clubs. You don't play at that level for so long by just settling. And that's one thing that he never allowed me to do. He always demanded, and playing next to him, like in the reserves or in training, like he he almost made me feel like I had to be like Teflon to be a professional footballer. Because if I could take abuse off Chris Bart Williams, I could take it off anybody.
Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. I'm so excited to welcome our new sponsors, Connection Technologies, a market leader in business-to-business tools ranging from business mobile, hosted telephony, and fixed line services. Head over to their website at www.connection-technologies.co.uk, fill in their inquiry web form and find out how Connection Technologies can support your business moving forward.
I think these days, like the modern leaders, it's probably you can come in all shapes and forms. It's probably different to what you see back then, where you've got the leaders who are charging around the pitch. But I think it's about people thinking about what qualities do they have? What do they have that they can bring on a match day? What do they have that they can bring day to day, and how can they actually shape the environment everyone's in? One thing I think stood out for me is like obviously you had an international career. You played for Jamaica. What was that like, and how was that maybe different to the club football, the club game?
Back then, Jamaica, playing for representing your country, one, it was listen, like, make no mistake, it's probably the biggest honour that I had in my career. And listen, I played a lot of games, which I'm extremely proud of. But representing your country is something that will live with you forever, and nobody can take away from you. But it was different. I don't know what the Welsh FA is like, who you're working with now in terms of professionalism and stuff. But I know what, obviously, working with England now, how professional that is, and They leave no stone unturned. Going away with Jamaica back then, I was thinking that that's how it was going to be, and it was very, very different. And listen, they don't have the level of professionalism, you could say, that you'd experience in England. So in terms of that, that was different and hard to adjust to. But listen, once you've had your training week and then it's game day, the the feeling that game day gave you, singing a national anthem, um, just pulling on that shirt and like lining up ready to play, and all the fans are screaming you're representing your country. I think that's the greatest feeling that like I've ever felt anyway. Like the hairs would stand up on my arms just singing that anthem, and it was brilliant.
And how did you adjust maybe to like the travel and the different environments that you had on international? It's obviously very different. Like you said, your whole career was based in England. Obviously Jamaica. It's not close. Like, how did you find that?
Going was always seemed fine. It was the return. It was when I was coming back that I'd struggle. I remember this one time that I was playing. I think I was playing in a World Cup qualifier, and we had two games, and they were in Jamaica, and came back and like my manager at the time, I was at Barnsley, Simon Davey, was desperate to get me back. We had Crystal Palace away, and he was desperate for me to come back, and I flew back a day earlier, landed literally the night before the game played, and I remember I was awful. I was just exhausted. I had nothing in me. Like sometimes as a wide player, when things aren't going your way, you've just got to simplify your game, and like everything and anything I tried just didn't work. It was almost like I had jelly legs. Even like 5 yard passes, I was basically Crystal Palace's 12th man, um, and I just couldn't wait for that game to end. That game will stick with me in my mind. I'll never forget that. But listen, those experiences are, again, representing your country and then coming back to play your club football. I think it's brilliant. I never understand players that turn down representing their country.
Yeah, no, and I think in your defense, they always talk about, if you're going towards America, that direction, being a lot easier to cope with in terms of the jet lag. It's when you come back,
Mm.
that you really struggle. And I think like there's general like advice out there. It takes an hour per time zone that you go through.
Mm.
So you're probably looking at, probably takes you about a week realistically for your body to fully adjust back to
Readjust, yeah.
where you are.
Mm.
So, if you look back on that Crystal Palace game, I've got a bit of defence for you there on that one.
My manager.
Um, you touched on it there, like the professionalism you have now and experiencing, working for England and working for England youth teams. Obviously, like really successful recently, lots of top players coming through. You're working with those elite players. What sort of characteristics do you see in the modern players that shines, helps the ones you're seeing coming into like the England setup that maybe help them be successful, or is there not one characteristic?
I think now, I think as the game's definitely changed. I think the level of the professionalism, like the players don't have to be told what to do now. They almost like they know it. Like, okay, for an example, um, like pre-season, um, like everybody comes back super fit already. So like I remember, like obviously when I was playing, especially in the earlier years, like the off season, your summer, like was just about like just completely like resting. Obviously, you do a couple of your base fitness runs, but like it was literally about chilling, relaxing. And pre-season was for getting fit. Like pre-season now, everybody comes back fit, and then it's just about getting them back to another level. It's incredible. like I see the players and like the programs that they get given now. It's almost like they have no break. Um, but yeah, I find it astounding. The players, I think the professionalism in the players these days has gone up tenfold, and I think everybody, 90% of footballers now, they probably more, they're all just like incredible athletes. And I think if you're not an athlete these days, I think you've got to be damn good at football. I look at who's a good example that's playing now. Maybe some like Jorginho, for example, who's not athletically gifted, but he's a superb footballer. You have got to be probably in that ilk of footballer to go and have a top career. He's not the most explosive, not the most powerful, but like a lovely footballer to watch and technically very, very astute. But these days now, everybody is definitely an athlete.
Yeah, and I think like you touched on it there, it's just we keep looking at the game thinking, the levels are increasing, the physicality is increasing, and at that top level it just keeps going. I think once again they brought out a report, and the World Cup just gone is looking at something like 20% higher in terms of physical stats compared to the last one, and that's only 4 years. And I think that's just incredible. And you see lots of teams, like lots of teams being really successful from being physical teams. You've got the USA, they run a lot. You've got Canada, you've got Japan, very different, but run Morocco. You've got all these teams at the World Cup going there, and you think that, they're probably not the bigger nations, but they're doing so well. And it's on the back of that increased physicality you're getting. So, I think you can't necessarily, being a young player coming through, if you don't focus on it, if you don't value your physical development as well as your technical development, you, like you say, you're going to find it really tough. So I've got just thinking about like those individual players that you work with, and just some advice to young players out there, young players wanting, aspiring to be the next level. What's your biggest bits of advice you might give them?
Uh, Young players coming through now.
Mm,
Um, listen, your work ethic has got to be top. Um, you have to enjoy it. Like enjoyment is a must. Like, but your work ethic has to be top every day, day in, day out. Even when you're having bad days, your work ethic. And I played with so many players and against so many players that had far more ability than me. And but I had a longer career because like I was hungrier just to progress, to perform, to succeed. And if you take your foot off the gas for a second, there's somebody always beneath you that wants your spot. Um, and like in these top clubs now, these elite clubs, you look at them and they're just bringing players. They're bringing players in left, right, and centre, or there's players underneath them that are coming through. So you have to be hungry. You have to want it. You have to be determined to go through the bad stuff as well, because listen, it's definitely not easy. So you've got to be prepared to be criticised, because there's a lot of that scrutinised. But yeah, two things: you have to work your nuts off, and you have to enjoy it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And just staying on that international the theme at the moment, for those people out there, that don't get to see what an international camp looks like. Can you give like a little insight into what it's like for these young players, these young international players coming on camp, and what it's like for them, what experience they get, what does international camps and football look like?
Couple of things really for me as well, because obviously last year was my first year and it was like a fantastic experience. I'm looking forward to this year again. We've got camps coming up in the next couple of weeks. But they're tough, long days. So if you're away for 10 to 12 days, it's a long couple of weeks, because you got to think, uh, everybody's come from different football clubs with different structures and different ways of playing, and players are on different minutes, and the head coaches are trying to squeeze in so much into such a short space of time. So getting over your playing principles, getting over all the information, in possession, out of possession, on getting information over about the opposition. It's a lot, and you've got to be, more than anything, mentally tuned in. For the players, it must be tough, but for the coaches, it's tough as well because, as you know, Dan, you're working round the clock. Late nights, I couldn't believe it in my first camp how late you go to bed working. Obviously, prepping training, then reviewing training, analysing training, then prepping for the next day and prepping for games and who's ready to play and team selections. It is a lot of stuff, and as players coming in, it's daunting for them as well, especially if this their first camps. Adjusting, nerves, what I alluded to earlier about your teammates, having your, whether they think you're a good player or not, impressing the coaching staff. There's so many of these emotions that go through players' heads, which is tough. And some players rise to it and love it, and some players they wilt, and it takes them a little bit of time to adjust and adapt. And listen, we have to give them that time to adjust because everybody's characteristics are very much different. You have quiet characters, but you have some characters that love it and really take to it. But yeah, those camps, they're brilliant experiences, but people think that just working for the national teams is a jolly up. That they're sadly mistaken.
No, I'm with you there, and I echo the fact that certainly on the international scene, the amount of work, the amount of detail that goes on behind the scene and preparing these camps, the detail around training, opposition analysis, is loads. And I just thinking, obviously, like you mentioned there about the players, is how important is it these days for young players to be scholars of the game, because they're expected to sit through, or expected, or they need to sit through so many different meetings, so many different things about their game, about the team's game, about the different styles. So I think actually, just looking at the game with that mindset that you're learning from each different aspect, and how important do you think mindset is in terms of football and players and careers, and
For me, mindset for me is 80% of the game. Um, Honestly, like there's so many examples and one example that we've spoken about a couple of times is my career and where it took me. Obviously, growing up in London, but ended up moving up north. I know so many of my pals that I played with and against, like no chance would I be moving up north. And that's a mindset thing. Yeah, it players that they just keep breaking down with muscular injuries, players that have big injuries, ACLs and broken legs and stuff like that. And it all boils back down to that same thing, mindset. What is your mindset like? Being out of the team, new manager coming in, not playing you. What's your mindset like? Being played out of position, not happy about it. What's your mindset like? Getting relegated. What's your mindset like? All of these factors, and not just that in terms of being in when you're in and around the building in football, but like a lot of that as well is like family stuff. Like obviously, it's a known fact that footballers, like the divorce rate when you're a footballer, like is pretty high. So off the field stuff like family, like breaking up. What is your mindset like? Can you park that off to one side, go into work and still have that determination, that focus to still want to be a winner and still be professional? Because it's not easy. It's a mindset, and some people really struggle. And being released? What's your mindset like? And being out of contract at the end of the year and your phone's not ringing and waiting around having to keep yourself fit on your own. What is your mindset? So there's loads and loads of examples. So for me, that's why I say it's 80% of the game that listen, you can talk about many players like talking about Neymar, who just got PSG is saying that they didn't want him, so he's just obviously gone to Saudi. But imagine Neymar being thinking I'm one of the best, greatest players in the world, being told that we don't want you anymore. It's like it's a mindset. So it's like there's so many examples, but mindset is such a big thing. You've got to be a tough cookie to want to play this game and have longevity in the game.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think no, and also just having that understanding of, I think you touched it on there, like on every individual has their own thing going on. I think sometimes when we come into the place of work, we just expect everyone to be this robot and this person that's going to, perform and just, that understanding that every person is individual. They could have things going on in their life outside of football that, is going to affect them. It's going to affect their work at the end of the day, and just that understanding of different people and how they're dealing with things, their families, moving to different places. And sometimes it needs a bit of time. It needs that understanding, I think, is really important, and especially with young lads and players coming through. It's like you mentioned there earlier about the England players coming onto England camp. I think we always used to, all these players are coming on camp and we want them to perform straight away. But then obviously understanding the gravity of what's just happened there. Like, these players are going on often like their first England camp. They're going to be excited. They're going to be nervous, and how are they going to, how are we getting the best out of them as coaches to be able to perform on that match day so be comfortable in training and enjoy the environment. And it's not just they've come away and they come away and not enjoying it, because it needs to be fun. Like you mentioned, it's hard work, but it needs to be fun. I'm just still thinking along the lines of like players coming through. Obviously, you're under 18s manager at Peterborough. And
21s now.
21s now. Need to your Wikipedia bio. But these players coming through. What do you see in terms of like the most successful ones? The ones that you look at and you go, yeah, he's gonna make it, or he's got it to play the next level. Or I think he's got the ability, to play, especially at under 21s level, to go on to be a first team player. I think at 21s level you can have loads of brilliant footballers, but whether they're going to make an impact if they get called up to the first team tomorrow. I think, what does it take, or what qualities do these players need to have to become first team players, senior players?
That's a really good question. Do you know, like being for the last couple of years, been being 18s head coach and now going on to the 21s. I think the easiest thing as a coach of a youth team or of the 18s is getting those good players professional contracts. I think that's the easiest thing. Um, and now going up to the 21s, the gap that there is between 21s and first team is humongous. And I think the toughest, was a part of my remit this season, is getting players into the first team. And I think that is like a whole nother ball game. And I've gone from last year looking at probably 60% of my team last year, because we was really successful, saying, right, yeah, 6 or 7 of them are going to get professional contracts. But now being 21's coach, it's like, how many of these are actually going to get into our first team, or failing that, going to have careers? And that is, there's such a gap that these players don't understand that there is. And it's all well and good being a good under 18s player and a good under 21s player, but that ain't going to get you into our first team or going to get you a career in the league. And trying to break that down to them is because academy football is, listen, it's good. Like, you're developing players. That's what you're there to do, develop them. But like, playing first team is a whole nother league, obviously. But getting them to understand that it's not just tippy tappy football. It's about winning your battle first and being horrible and like knowing how to play the game and being professional and stuff like that. And some of them, they just don't get it. And a large part of my job is making them understand that. And I've got a squad of 16, 17 players in my 21s. And I'll probably be lucky if one or two will get into our first team or have careers. And that's the reality. And it's tough. So me jumping up to the 21s and realizing that, because I've worked a lot with the first team this pre-season and being with the first team, being with the first team manager, and obviously having a long career myself, knowing what it's about, and then trying to get these players to understand the realization that first team football, that your mistakes have got to go from that to that, is so important. The manager needs to trust them, be able to rely on them. So I think that's the biggest message that I'm trying to get across to these players now.
Yeah, just whilst you're talking there, made me think back to one of our first podcasts. This is about 18 months ago now. Was with a player. His name's Stuart Sinclair, and Stuart had a non-league career up until the age of 30, and so it took him to 30 to get into, the football league, to become a League Two, League One player. And he spoke around, obviously not having the biggest ability, but just learning to become effective as a player, learning to be like, when you come into like that senior and that first team, you need to be effective. Like you mentioned there, I think you're speaking about tippy tappy, or, actually there's going to be elements of the game that you need to do to be effective in what you do. And then also, like you mentioned there, is when that first team manager calls upon you, that is your one big opportunity. And I see so many players, obviously, they get called in, they're like a good player, they might be a brilliant player, but they've got that one opportunity to make the impression. And if you don't make it at that moment in time, you might not see those players again for another 9 months, 12 months, or even just the ability to back up those games as well. You can see a player come in, he's brilliant. One game he's brilliant, 2 games he's brilliant, third game not so good, fourth game not so good, because they're just not used to it at an academy level. They're just not used to the demands. You're going to come into the football league these days, whether it's, League One or Championship, like it is relentless. It's going to be 3 games a week, and you're going to be expected to do it. And as soon as you make those mistakes, you then back out of the team, you've got to get yourself fit back in. So just thinking about it, it's more than just, being a nice footballer. There's those other elements to the game that players need to become rounded, I guess.
100%. 100%.
Brilliant. Well, I guess just to finish us off, really, like, and just if I was to ask you and put you on the spot here a little bit, you're one big, and you've kind of spoken to us about this already, I think. So, your 1 or 2 big things, like you're an aspiring player, that what you would recommend for any player to just go out and do right now, or what would they be?
Just like, I'm probably going off of the back of yesterday, we had a game, and there's so many players want to be players before they're players. Does that make sense? Um, they think that they're players before they're actually players. And like, for example, if you're a central midfielder, what is it that you need to do? What is it that you need to nail down to go and be a central midfielder in the league, whether that be the Premier League, the Championship, League One, League Two? Like, what are you good at? What are those characteristics that make you a central midfielder that's going to get the first team manager to, and just hone in on that, do what you're good at, do your job. There's so many players again at 21s level that they want to do the World Cup Willie stuff and all the rest of it. That ain't getting you into the first team. That certainly ain't going to get you a career, because the World Cup Willie stuff, when it comes off, it looks brilliant. You'll get a clap and an applause. But when it doesn't come off, the manager wants to rip your head off. So it's just focusing on making sure that you're reliable, that you're trustworthy, because that's the biggest thing in the game, especially being in and around the first team. A manager wants people that he can trust, that he can rely on. I think that's the biggest thing. The manager always wants to turn around and be like, I can trust him. He ain't gonna throw me under the bus, and he ain't gonna try and do his own thing. He's gonna play within the structure. So they're the biggest takeaways for me.
No, I got to agree, and I got to echo that. And then just, England talk about brilliant basics. You got to have brilliant basics, and then understanding and knowing what your strengths are, because it's your strengths that get you in the team, but also that realization of it's what are your weaknesses and what you need to work on. It's because it's those weaknesses that then eventually get you out of the team. Listen, thanks, Jamal. Thanks for joining me on a Wednesday evening. I really appreciate it, and thanks for all of your knowledge, advice, and sharing that for the audience.
No problem at all. Anytime, Dan. Top man.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamal, and thank you to Connection Technologies once again for sponsoring this episode.
Top man. Take care.